Okay. All right, good. So we are going to pick up with the Gospel of Mark. We were on chapter 6, and if you remember, we basically left it that Jesus had sent his 12 apostles on their missionary journey, but we haven't heard much about it. They just were sent off, and we talked about that. And now we are going to pick it up with the story of King Herod at verse 14. Would somebody like to read?
I'll begin.
Okay.
Okay. King Herod heard about it, for his fame had become widespread, and people were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why mighty powers are at work in him. Others were saying, he is Elijah. Still others, he is a prophet like any of the prophets. But when Herod learned of it, he said, it is John whom I beheaded. He has been raised up.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute because this is what will set up what comes next. Okay, so just to, kind of situate yourself, Jesus has sent the 12 apostles out to begin their ministry, and they were going out and they drove out many demons and they anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. They also went out and preached repentance. And now this few verses that Valerie just read, this is now still in real time, so to speak. It's still contemporary. So King Herod hears about what the apostles are doing in the name of Jesus, because Jesus's fame had become widespread, and people were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. And that is why mighty powers are at work in him, in Jesus. Okay. So what does that tell you in real time right now? By the time Jesus has sent his 12 apostles out, what is John the Baptist still living, or is he dead?
He's dead.
He's dead. Okay. Yeah, because they're saying he has been raised from the dead. Now that's kind of odd, because how could Jesus be John the Baptist raised from the dead when we know that both Jesus and John, were living at the same time? I mean, John baptized Jesus. What do you think they're thinking about when they say John the Baptist has been raised from the dead? No thoughts?
It's John the Baptist. He was around a lot more. He was around preaching, baptizing, and did a whole lot of things, so they knew him. Where Jesus to them just showed up out of nowhere, doing the same things they think that John the Baptist did. So how else could it be anybody else but John?
Yeah, I mean, but they're not talking about raising from the dead as we might think of. You take the dead person and you raise them up, right?
Right.
So,
the spirit of John.
Yeah, it's the spirit of John.
Spirit of John.
So apparently, now we know historically, we know from the very beginning of John's gospel that Jesus started his public ministry after John was arrested. Okay. But John wasn't yet dead necessarily. But at some point, John dies, and maybe it's after that Jesus's fame starts, to be widespread. And so some people, maybe they think the spirit of John left John's body when he was killed and entered Jesus. Do you think that's plausible?
I do believe what they would think back there in those days. They
Okay,
believed in spirits. They believed in spirits, whether good or bad.
What do you think? What do you think that what may have given them that idea? What do you think Jesus was doing that gave them the idea, possibly, that he was John? He now had John the Baptist's spirit in him. There must have been some kind of similarities between Jesus and John the Baptist. Okay. But why would they think that was John? I mean, it seems to me there must have been something that Jesus was doing. I'm not saying I know exactly what it was, but Jesus must have been either preaching or healing or baptizing. He must have been doing something that gave people the impression that he was somehow carrying on John the Baptist's ministry.
It's the baptizing.
Yeah, maybe he was. We don't have a lot of evidence of Jesus baptizing. I could say certainly his preaching, when you compare some of Jesus's preaching, the way he preached with John the Baptist's preaching and the way the Baptists preach, there is a lot of similarity between the two of them. That's one of the reasons why I've personally said that I think Jesus was a disciple of John, that he learned how to preach from John the Baptist, because a lot of his preaching sounds very much like John the Baptist.
Could it also be because Jesus baptized?
Well, as we were saying that, I mean, the only knowledge we have of Jesus baptizing is from the Gospel of John, and there's just this one little sentence tucked away in there saying that Jesus was baptizing along with the disciples of John. So could have been that. But once Jesus was really doing his public ministry, there's not a lot of evidence that he was baptizing a lot. None of the Gospels really say anything about him baptizing people. But whatever it was, there clearly was something about Jesus's ministry that reminded people of John the Baptist, which must have led them to believe that he was really the spirit of John, was resurrected in Jesus Christ. Now, others were saying Elijah. Anybody have any thought about Elijah?
Well, I think maybe their messages, what they were saying was very similar. To repent because the kingdom of God is at hand. So when Jesus was saying that, John had been saying that, and perhaps Elijah was telling people that they needed to acknowledge God and to follow his ways and his laws and precepts. So the content of their messages were very much the same.
Okay, so there were some similarities as well, probably in Jesus's preaching and in Elijah's preaching. And does anybody remember or what the theory about Elijah was? Remember, there's the theory that Elijah didn't really die, right? Elijah was taken up in the fiery chariot, and with him going into heaven that way, what was one thought about him? If he went up to heaven in a fiery chariot, what might happen later in time?
That he was supposed to come back?
That he was going to come back again. Yeah. So there was a theory that Elijah was going to come back again. And do you remember, Esther, what was going to happen? I mean, Elijah was going to come back, and then what was supposed to happen once Elijah came back?
Nope, I don't remember.
The Messiah would come. Okay. Or the end would come. So Elijah was considered he was going to be the forerunner of the Messiah and the coming of the end. And if you remember, the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, actually portray John the Baptist as though he were Elijah. Remember how they had him wearing the same clothes, the camel hair, and eating the honey and locusts, just like Elijah, because the idea was John was really Elijah come back, and he was the one preparing the way for Jesus, who is the Messiah. So there clearly is some association between not only John the Baptist and Elijah, but also Jesus and Elijah. And then finally, he is a prophet like any of the prophets, and that's more generic. Generally, do you remember what's the job of a prophet?
Warn people.
I'm sorry, say it again.
I said to warn the people.
To warn them, and warn them about what?
About God's impending wrath if they didn't turn to him.
Yeah, they warned them. Yeah, warned the people to get their act together and follow the commands of God, or else there would be consequences to pay. And clearly, Jesus, was preaching in that way as well. It's interesting to note. Does anybody? All right, so think about this. So some people say he was John the Baptist. Some said he was Elijah, and others said he was a prophet. Does that sound like another story? It comes out of the Gospel of Matthew. That answer that Jesus was John the Baptist, he was Elijah, he was one of the prophets. All right, it comes from when Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And some say, "You're John the Baptist, you're Elijah, you're one of the prophets." And then Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am?" Okay.
Right. He was talking to Peter.
And then Peter says, right, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So this is interesting. This is another example of clearly people were talking about Jesus as though he were somebody else. He was a spirit, or he was. But this story is just told differently. So Mark was probably aware that people were, thinking of Jesus as John the Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets, but he doesn't put it in the context of Jesus asking, who do people say that I am? He puts it in the context of King Herod, and wondering who this guy is. Okay, so that sets up this story that King Herod is wondering who this guy Jesus is, and some have said he's John the Baptist, but King Herod admits, "I beheaded John the Baptist," right? And now he has been raised up. What do you think? How do you think Herod feels about that? If he was the one who beheaded John the Baptist and Jesus is the one who is now John being raised up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be a little scared, wouldn't you? Yeah. I mean, so clearly King Herod, Jesus has gotten the attention of the king. I mean, that's how widespread his fame had become. And as I said, this all is in real time. In other words, this story is happening as Mark is telling the story. The disciples are out preaching and healing and curing, and once Mark mentions Herod, it gives rise to another story about Herod. And now what will follow is not in real time, it's a flashback. Okay. But mentioning Herod reminds Mark of this story. So now we're going to flash back in time and we're going to read something that happened before. So go ahead.
Just a question. Do you think that at that point Herod had some sort of remorse? Because I agree, whoever said he was scared, but that maybe he started to develop a conscience or something. I always think of those kings as being, just out there doing whatever they wanted to do. But now Herod is starting to think, okay, I messed up.
right, let's read this next story and we'll come back to that after we hear the whole story. That's a good question. Do you think Herod is having doubts or remorse or that kind of stuff? Okay, so Valerie, why don't you continue with verse 17?
Holy man, and kept him in custody. He heard him speak, he was very much perplexed, yet he liked to listen to him. His military officers and the leading men of Galilee. Herodias' own daughter came in and performed a dance that delighted Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, "Ask of me whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you." He even swore many things to her. "I will grant you whatever you ask of me, even to half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" She replied, "The head of John the Baptist." The girl hurried back to the king's presence and made her request. "I want you to give me at once on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was deeply distressed, but because of his oath and the guest, he had not wished to break his word to her. So he dispatched an executioner with orders to bring back his head. He went off and beheaded him in the prison. He brought in the head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl in turn gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
Okay. Pretty gruesome story, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
What strikes you about it?
Yeah. That Herod didn't really want to do this.
Okay.
And probably why he had the fear at this point is because he really didn't do it, but he had already sworn an oath in front of a lot of people. So he had no choice but to do it, but to behead John.
Okay, so one thing is he grudgingly did this. Okay, what other things strike you about the story?
That he said that he liked to listen to John. He liked to listen to him, what he was saying, although he may not have been a true believer, but he thought of him probably as a holy person, and he liked the message he was giving.
All right, anybody had a feeling like that towards someone where you're intrigued and you like to listen to what they're saying, but you probably have no intention of actually living it out?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of people out there that say intriguing things and it makes us think, and we actually like to listen to it, but we're not really sure whether, we want to go by it.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. And Herod seemed to be a bit contradicted within himself because it says he feared John, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. So it's like he already knew, but maybe because of his position, his riches or whatever, his lifestyle, he just wasn't going to follow John regardless of all of that. He wasn't going to give up what he had, but he already knew that he was a holy man. So I just answered my own questions. Yeah, I think he had some remorse, but he wasn't willing to give up what he had to make changes.
Well, what are some of the conflicts going on in the story? I mean, Herod's under a lot of pressure here. There's a lot of different things going on that's antagonistic towards him. What are some of the issues that you think Herod's dealing with by reading this story?
Well, in his marriage, he married his brother's wife. And even in the eyes of in the Gentiles, especially the Jews, that you couldn't do that. But I guess because he was king, he felt like he could do anything. And so people frowned upon that.
Okay, so he's in a marriage that, at the very least, John is declaring is unlawful, right? We don't know a lot of the details. There's a sense that that Herod's brother divorced Herodias, and then Herod married her. So there's this issue that he's married to his brother's ex-wife while the brother is still alive. And, imagine how that would go over in a household.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, so just the tension there, the kind of the personal tension among Herod, Herodias, and his brother, Philip. And then you've got John the Baptist saying that this marriage is unlawful. So who does that annoy?
Herodias. She's the one who harbored the grudge.
Yeah. So what do you get the impression about how did Herod feel about John saying?
Well, I think Herod, he didn't want to hear it, but it made him think.
Yeah.
Like you just said, he had doubts about what he did. Sometimes we do things because everybody else is doing them. And then somebody comes along to make us think about maybe this wasn't the right course to take after all. And he was thinking about it, and she knew it, and she hated it because it made her feel inferior.
Yeah, so if Herod fears John and he knows him to be a righteous and holy man, he probably is causing him to think about what he's done, right? In marrying Herodias. He's not sure that he wants to do anything about it, right? Remember, we said it's okay. We many of us know the experience of being intrigued by someone, but not necessarily feeling that we want to do what they're telling us. You think what he's saying has anything to do with his being kept in custody? Why do you think? Do you have any speculation why Herod arrested John?
Probably to keep him from spreading the knowledge and continue to speak on what Herod had done. And Herod was already carrying a feeling of guilt and heaviness about marrying his brother's wife, especially while his brother was still alive. And the fact that John probably didn't have any apprehensions about the truth and telling the truth.
Yeah, John probably just told it like it was. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I'm beginning to suspect that Herodias had a lot more to do with what's going on, like the internal workings of maybe the court or the palace and all of that. Because I don't know, she's the ex-wife of the brother. And maybe she just liked the lifestyle. She didn't care about anything else. It was all about Herodias. And she may have even sort of conned King Herod into marrying her because that's what she wanted, which is why all this animosity built up in her because she didn't want John the Baptist telling King Herod, well, this isn't lawful and you shouldn't do that, and etc. So I think she had a lot of influence maybe in this conflict with King Herod and John.
Wow, you're making her out to be quite a Jezebel, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, hold that back in your mind, that image of Jezebel. Yeah, hold that in your mind, the idea of Jezebel. We'll come back to that. But go ahead.
I think it makes sense. It probably was a power move. Like you just said,
yes.
Esther, she was climbing the ladder.
Yep.
And she used the brother to get to the king, and now she was in the power seat. And
exactly.
She wanted nobody else to take away from that power seat. And John was threatening that seat.
Right.
So then,
so get rid of him.
So if you're coming in from that way, why maybe then do you think Herod arrested John?
To keep him quiet.
or to satisfy Herodias.
To satisfy
Herodias, yes.
She wants him dead, but maybe he feels he could kind of come to a compromise and say, well, how about if we just arrest him?
Arrest him.
Yes.
And
in the first line, it says he had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias.
All right, there it is, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and Herod, if as we go on, you'll see if he's at all wishy-washy, rather than just kill him because Herodias wants, he's trying to find some kind of middle ground to keep people happy. And so, all right, I'll just arrest him. But that wasn't enough, right, for Herodias. She wanted him dead. So all right, let's move on to then there's this birthday party going on. Mm-hmm. And Herodias's daughter. Now, if said that way, who's the father of the daughter?
The brother.
Herod's brother.
Most likely Philip, yes.
Right.
Because this is not Herod's daughter.
Right.
Right.
And she comes in and performs a dance that delighted Herod and his guests. Okay, so let's go back and look at who his guests are. Who are his guests?
His courtiers, his military officers, and the leading men of Galilee.
Right. So do you think this is a mixed crowd of men and women?
Sounds like more men.
Nah, yeah, this is a frat party, guys. Okay, this is all a bunch of men. And what do you think a bunch of men when they're partying together? What do you think they're doing?
Probably talking about the females and probably gouging or gauging at the girl who's dancing and becoming fascinated with her.
Drinking.
And Herod is
included
in the
Dirty old men. They're dirty old men.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, let's start with their drinking first of all, right? It's hard to think that Herod's thrown himself a birthday party and he's got all the top leading men of the country and they ain't drinking. So they're all drinking, and yeah, they're probably. If not just talking, they're probably ogling over any women that are around. What do you think? What do you think about that in terms of the stepfather and stepdaughter then, and what happens here?
That was one of the things that came to my mind. This is your stepdaughter, and you become so fascinated with her that you're willing to give up even half of your kingdom for her. But yet you're married to her mother, who is supposed to be, or supposed to have been the one that was supposed to now be the love of your life. So now,
what are you saying, Valerie? Come on out and say it.
Right, dirty old man.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as standard abuse. Sex abuse.
Yes.
But back then, after all, she wasn't his blood. So it wasn't like it was incest.
No, but it's
technically.
Women didn't have choices back then. Men did what they wanted to do, and the woman suffered the consequences. A woman could be raped, and it was her fault she got raped.
Yeah, well, this is classic sex abuse.
Yeah.
And the only reason I pointed it out is that this continues to be the primary form of sexual abuse today. Stepfathers towards their stepdaughters.
Yes.
Up in the White House. Mm-hmm.
And somehow as a priest, when all the sexual abuse of priests was going on, and everybody pointing to celibacy as that's the reason, that failed to account that the overwhelming amount of child sex abuse that occurs in this country is by married men. And they are married men abusing their wives' daughters, their stepdaughter. That is the major form of sexual abuse in this country.
Yeah, sometimes it's their own daughters.
somehow making it in their mind, making it their stepdaughter is like, but it's not really my, it's not really my child, but not really any
It's
kin
not
to
my
me,
child.
then it's okay. In their mind, it makes it okay to them because the child is the blood relative of theirs.
But also the child of the mother and the nephew probably back.
All right. Well, so we're setting, just to set that up, that Herod, there's nothing in this that says outright that the dance she performs is sexual in nature. But, again, you're at a frat party. There's all these men drinking and drunk. And, Herod's stepdaughter starts dancing and delights Herod and his guests. I don't think she was doing a ballet or waltzing or things. She was clearly dancing in a way that excited them.
Well,
she was doing the erotic stuff.
Days, I mean, when you had that
well, wait a minute. There's a lot of background noise. Dee, could you or
he's supposed to entice the women?
say it again, Pat. I didn't. You're coming in and out.
Weren't they originally that way to entice the men?
Probably. I mean, I don't know.
The women were there to entertain the men.
Right.
And they're not going to entertain them playing tiddlywinks.
Well, that's right. I mean, and that's why I say there's nothing in here that directly says that what she does was as of a sexual nature. But I think we can kind of, as they do say, do the math and figure out what's going on here.
I mean, that was her purpose. She was there to entertain the men. Well, how the women entertain the men was usually sexual in nature.
So then Herod makes this promise to her: ask me of whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you. And he swore many things to her. I will grant you whatever you ask of, even to half of my kingdom. What do you think that's all about? Why is he making this promise to her?
Because he wants her just that bad.
Right. My thought is he's lusting after her. He wants the daughter, really. And he wants to impress her by offering her all these things.
So you think and it's more even like maybe down the road, then he'll get even more from her?
Yes.
So you think it's that? Okay.
And down the road, her mother could kill her, have her daughter killed.
I believe Herod is getting ready to get rid of Herodias.
Well, right.
Well, what is obvious here about her? She loved her mother. Otherwise, she would not ask her mother what she asked for.
Okay. Well, let's not jump right away to that just yet. Let's still think between Herod and what he's promising, because I'm wondering, does this have any connection to maybe whatever happened between Herod and Herodias back in the day? See, y'all were making Herodias out to be.
Could there possibly been some infidelity prior to?
Yeah, I wonder. Y'all make Herodias out to be the Jezebel, but what if Herod knew what he was doing, and he made extraordinary promises to Herodias, saying, dump Philip and you come to me and look what you'll have.
Wow.
Maybe this isn't the first time he's made these promises.
Maybe.
Right.
I would like to know what Philip's position was. Was he
a
person of stature and worth?
I have to look that up, Gretchen. Let me see if it says real quick here. Philip, I think that there's some background noise. Can you figure that out? Yeah. I'm pretty sure, I'll have to look it up, Gretchen, that at this time Israel is split up into 3 different areas, and the 3. All right. The big Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the Herod who was king when Jesus was born. He's the Herod that has the 2-year-old, the infant boys killed. You with me?
Yes.
That's this Herod's father.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm pretty sure, and I will have to look it up, that when Herod the Great died, Israel was divided up into 3 sectors, and each of his 3 sons was given a sector. So I think Philip had control over a certain sector of Israel, and Herod had control. So it's possible, so Herod and Philip could have been rivals, right? And that was one way Herod stuck it to his brother, by stealing his wife. But I'll have to look that up. I'll do that. I'll report back to you next week on exactly that.
That's good
So
enough.
they had the same position, basically.
Well, they had different areas, though. Yeah, but they were. I forget what they call it. There's a term that they used that describes the kind of. It wasn't a monarchy. It was a triarchy. Like there were 3 kings in Israel, but it was territory. They had different territories.
Okay.
So I'll have to look that up, but I think that's the case. So Herod basically steals Philip's wife from him, and
I'll look it up.
And one of the things is, was this move. I'll give you this. I'll give you that. Is that how he got Herodias? Just speculating. There's nothing in the scripture that says that's what happened. Okay.
I'll look it up.
But
Okay.
Historical.
All right. So all right. Maybe he's making this promise because he's now trying to, in essence, to court his stepdaughter. What's another reason he would have made all these promises? We kind of get a hint at it a little bit later on.
Showing off?
Yeah, he's showing off, right? He's showing off to his guests how big and powerful he is and how generous he can be, right?
But he probably never expected her to make that request either.
Oh, obviously he didn't. But now it's interesting. I was reading that these kings of Israel at the time, they were actually pawns of Rome. And it was not their prerogative to give away half their kingdom. Rome was still in charge. So this is kind of bluster that he's making this promise, because it's not clear at all that he could really even do it. But he makes the promise. She goes back to her mother. Now, go ahead. Do you want to play with that? You were mentioning something about that.
That she was true to her mother. I think she loved her mother. Otherwise, why would she ask her, what should I ask for? So she wanted to do her mother's wishes.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe she's loyal to her mother,
right?
And maybe she's a little bit fearful that this promise of having kingdom is actually going to hurt her mother, because shouldn't her mother have access to the kingdom? And if the king is going to give it to his his wife's daughter, then maybe that's going to take away from her mother. So I think you're right, Dee. It shows a love and a loyalty towards the mother.
So she could have said she wanted half the kingdom.
Right. And what would that have done for her mother? That would have,
her mother aside.
Yeah, that would have taken away from her mother. So the head of John the Baptist, right? Now, what does she ask for? Because that's her mother says, I want the head of John the Baptist. What does girl go ask for?
She asked
That
for it on the platter.
right.
A platter.
That's what she asked for.
On a platter. What do you think about that?
It's horrific. I can't even imagine seeing that. But in a way, to me, it just emphasizes this hatred that Herodias had for John with all the other stuff going on. So I'm going to ask for his head, but I want it served up to me. That's the connotation I got.
All right. So do you think Herodias is behind the platter, or do you think that, the daughter's name is, I think from another gospel, we find that her name is Salome. Do you think Herodias put in the platter, or do you think Salome added that?
It's probably the daughter in order to show
think so too.
honor to her mother.
Yes.
So
I think the daughter.
So what does that tell you about the daughter?
That she has great loyalty to her mother.
Okay, but but the whole idea of on the platter.
She can be ruthless too.
Yeah, she's got a bit of a ruthlessness about her as well. You see, none of these characters is particularly attractive, are they?
No, not really.
Yeah.
It's kind of like she threw some of that back into King Herod's face. Like, you've offered me all of this stuff, but this is what I want, and I want it big time. I want to make a spectacle of what it is that I'm asking you for.
Oh, that's nice, Esther. Now let's play with that a little bit. Now you just phrased something I hadn't thought about, but if the daughter is feeling at all abused by her stepfather, right?
Right.
By him making her do all of these things for his jollies and the jollies of his guests. And she was the one who added on a platter. And she knew that Herod was fond of John the Baptist. What is this?
It's really throwing it in his face.
Yeah, this is revenge.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
She's sticking it to him.
She used that festive day to get even with her husband, with Herod, and get rid of John at the same time.
Well, Herodias, yes, Herodias is getting the head of John the Baptist because that's what she wants. But the daughter, by asking that it be put on a platter, is getting back at Herod.
At Herod.
For abusing her, right? For using her as a sexual showpiece for his friends. He's making all these promises, and she's there like, okay, fine, you give me the head of John the Baptist, and I want it on a platter. It's gonna hurt for you to do this.
This is too much.
This is real ugly stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, we'll come back to it. Let's keep pressing. So the king is deeply distressed, but because of his oaths and the guests, he did not wish to break his word to her. So he promptly dispatched an executioner with orders to bring back his head. All right. Is Herod trapped here?
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Is there any way out?
No.
Not
because
for
he
him to
made his
save
promise in
face.
front of all his guests.
Right.
Wait a minute. Too many people are talking at the same time. Try again. Is there any way out for Herod?
No.
No way out?
I mean, he could renege on it, but how would he look in front of his guests?
Okay, well, all right. He could have reneged, right? And he would have taken the hit, right?
Yeah.
But he could have done it.
I don't think he wasn't strong enough to do that. He had to save face.
Any of you a good lawyer? I was asked this question in seminary once, and I pulled my lawyer move on him, and the professor started laughing. He said, "Never thought of that." I said, Herod could have said, John's head is worth more than half of my kingdom. So you can't have that.
Ah.
I only said you could have up to half of my kingdom.
Oh.
Okay.
Brilliant.
So he could have said, nope, 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 that's more than what I promised you. So you have to pick something else. See, every now and then it pays to have a lawyer around, right?
Yes.
But yeah, you don't want to sympathize too much for Herod. Herod could have gotten out of this. He could either, finessed it like a good lawyer, or he could have gone back and just said, I'm sorry, I overpromised. I'm not going to do that, right? But he doesn't. The executioner kills John, gives the head to the platter, and gives it to the girl, and then she in turns gives it to her mother. What does this say to you about the value of human life?
It wasn't worth much.
Not for these people, right? I mean, look at just how readily nobody's even hesitant about. No, there's no conversation here about the value of John the Baptist. None, right? It's all this fight. There's clearly all these tensions between Herod, Herodias, Salome, the guest, and John is sitting in prison doing nothing, and he gets his head chopped off. Because people are jockeying for power and position, right?
Well, it did say that he was distressed about it, but because of his promise, he went through with it. So it seems like Herod may have had a little bit of a conscience about it, but just didn't know, like you did as a lawyer, a way to get out of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was too much of a conscience. He was just.
Oh my gosh! You know what? Oh gosh, that remind I can relate that to exactly what's going on right now.
Oh yeah.
In the White House, all of those Republicans that are jockeying for power, the election is done. Trump is still spewing his lies, and people are dying, and the numbers are going up every single day. No respect for what's going on with everyday people, common people. It's the same thing. Power, money, everybody jockeying for what they can get for themselves in the White House right now.
Conspiracy.
Same thing.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
History repeats itself.
Yep.
Okay, well,
ugly. Greed is just an ugly thing. Yeah.
Good. I mean, that's a great connection. And I think that's exactly how we are called to read the Bible, is to pull it apart in terms of the way the story is in and of itself, and then begin to extrapolate from that, to go beyond that, and then to see those parallels. So here's a story that was written 2,000 years ago, right? And yet Esther was just able to see something in it about today. I was the one, I used the whole issue of Herod and Herodias as, again, issues about today between, stepfathers and stepdaughters. Any other thoughts about that?
Another insight about reading the Bible, it's almost like you have to read it as a cautionary tale. When you see this kind of stuff while we're reading this, related to what's going on today, so that we can be different people.
Humanity never changes.
Right. So that we can be Christ-like people.
So humanity may have a problem, but does that mean that we're all stuck?
No.
No, we're not stuck.
No.
Why not?
Because we have choices.
We have choices.
Yes. God gave us free will to make, our own decisions, and we just have to stop and think about what we're doing and try to make the right decision based on our beliefs in Jesus Christ.
Okay, so let's keep working on that now. All right, so you see this story, and we see parallels with modern day issues, whether it's sexual abuse of young women, whether it's public officials jockeying for power while other people are dying. What lessons do you learn from this? What can you personally take away from this?
Mm.
Well, I don't know. For me, first of all, it brings another level of awareness. You have to really stop and discern and think. And hopefully, it makes us better people. What I said before, in that we can be more understanding, more empathetic, more compassionate of what other people have experienced and are experiencing. So hopefully in some ways that changes how we react to what's going on in the world, to be more of a help to people who are not in our situation. So it's just that awareness that maybe I need to step it up. Maybe I need to do more. We all have our own charities and things that we probably give to. But when you see stories like this, and then you can relate it to what's going on now, it brings a new depth to what we probably need to be experiencing as far as other people are concerned.
Okay. Anybody else take a moral lesson for themselves from this story?
Well, I don't know how moral, but I can say yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was telling her, looking forward to Bible study today. And I told her how during Bible study, and I have read most of these passages many times, but now I have a whole different view on things. Once you open it up to discussion and get other points of views, it makes you think differently about some of the thoughts that you previously had, or sometimes it went right by you and you didn't get the depth of what the word was in the Bible and how it's really coming back to relate to us right now in these times right now. So it gives you a new enlightenment.
Absolutely. Yes.
And obviously, those of you who have been doing Bible study with me for these last 6 years or however long it's been, that I'm a big fan of, you gotta pull this stuff apart, line by line, and kind of ask questions of it and think of, as much time as to what's not said than what is said. And then you pull it all apart, and then you got to put it back together, though, right? You can't just leave it there. So that's great. I'm glad that you're starting to experience that, because some people don't like the way I do this, because it to them just gets their head spinning. But to me, this is the fun of the scripture. This is where the inspiration comes out, because the Spirit is guiding you as you're pulling it apart and as kind of revealing things to you. And even I, like today, I'm learning from listening to what you're saying about it. And to me, that's one of the great things of Bible study, is to kind of explore it together. Any other moral lessons that maybe you've learned from this?
Yeah, it's not so much something that I learned from this particular thing, but it reminds me that if you harbor anger and getting even with someone, it just leads to sin eventually.
Okay. Yep. Harboring anger is, leads. It just really leads to disaster. Good. Anybody else? I mean,
sometimes I feel like I'm in one place. There's a freestyle story. At one point, two sides. my side, and the since I did the third story, like we a lot of passages from the Bible.
Yeah, I mean that's a great insight, Catherine. That I think there are times that probably we all feel trapped, and that one possibility when we feel that is to make sure we talk to some folks and get different perspectives, because we might be setting up what we call a false dichotomy, right? It's either this or that. And yet often when we talk to people, they'll see a third or fourth or fifth possibility. And so, just like I said, was there any way out for Herod? Yeah, there was a way out for him. But he, in the spur of the moment, he felt trapped, and he didn't kind of think about it, right? He didn't take his time to reflect. He didn't ask anybody else's opinion. And as a result, he made a bad decision. But when we can, it's always good to step back and have some time to think about what you're going to do before you do it, because there may always be an option we haven't considered. Okay, well, that's good. One other parallel. Okay, I thought it was great that Esther could make this parallel about modern day politics and governance and the coronavirus. Let's go back into biblical times and remember that Mark is also an author, right? And as authors, if any of you have written, short stories or even long stories, or you like to read a lot, one things authors like to do is draw parallels and foreshadow things. If you look at it from a literary point of view, why do you think Mark is telling this story this way? Other than the fact that it happened, but why would he put it in this way, just as Jesus is getting his ministry going with his disciples? Does the story sound like somebody else's story?
Father, what do you mean by this way?
By
characteristic are you talking about?
Telling the story of a righteous man who is trapped in the machinations of people of power and ultimately loses his life over it.
That's Jesus. That relates to, yeah. That very last line, I needed to go back, but that very last line, when his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. I think about what was the rich man who requested Jesus' body?
Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea. That was his request of Jesus. But and I forget who spoke before me, said the same thing about the righteousness. Herod knew he was a good man. He knew he was a righteous man, and that's what Jesus was. So I see that relationship between how John and then the word resurrection. They thought that that Jesus was resurrected from John or Elijah. So, those references kind of made me think about Jesus' death.
Yeah. This is if you think about it, isn't this a parallel to Jesus's story himself? Jesus, is a good man, and he's doing the right thing. He's doing the work of God, and who's all concerned about Jesus? Who are the ones that are figuring out what to do about Jesus because they're threatened by Jesus?
The Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, where it says about John being arrested and bound in prison. Well, Jesus was arrested after being falsely accused.
Right. And he's arrested by the temple guards, right? The religious leaders. So yeah, I mean, just like Herodias felt threatened by John, the religious leaders feel threatened by Jesus, and again, they entrap him, and as they're fighting out, their power moves and everything, it's Jesus who ends up losing his life in the process. So Mark is really telling the story of John the Baptist in parallel with the story of Jesus. Okay. And so I would think Mark would want us to see that. And he's doing it just as, if you remember, just as the 12 are leaving to do their mission, so Jesus is really now coming into his own. Mark reminds us of this story of John the Baptist, who had come into his own, and look where that got him. Because then right after this, let's finish the story. Valerie, you want to start at verse 30?
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Sorry. The return of the 12. The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them.
Okay. So you have to connect this story, the return of the 12, right, with the mission of the 12. So the story of John the Baptist is sandwiched right in between the mission of the 12, right? The 12 are sent out, and then they come back, right? But in between, Mark tells you this story. Does anybody remember from a few weeks ago? You probably won't. Mark did the exact same thing in another story. He started a story, then he inserted another story, and then he finished with the first story.
Oh, that was Jairus' daughter and the woman with the hemorrhage.
Yeah. So, and then remember how we made the connection? The 12 years was what joined the two stories. And then we made that whole thing about this was really about life. And, and so it wasn't just these two women whose lives were saved, but it was their ability to procreate and create new life, be the bearers of new life. All because Mark sandwiched one story in between the other. He made a clear connection between the two. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. He sandwiches the story of John the Baptist in between the mission of the 12. And again, when he's doing that, what he's pretty much saying is, be careful, because once you go on these missions, bad things can happen.
Well, I want to say something in the middle of this. I think he put this in a right place, because if you go back up, if you come back down, they talking about all the right Herod's opinion of Jesus. They talking about all the things that Jesus did, and then at the end of this sentence, is telling it is John who I beheaded. So John is beheaded. We don't know that he's beheaded. And so to me, he was explaining what happened to John. So to me, he just said, okay, in this particular thing, we got John dead. Well, how did John die? Okay, let me tell you the story about John. And then he goes back into with the mission of the 12. So I think he just came in here just to tell us, because Herod's mentioning John here, to tell us what really happened to John. And then he goes back to the story that he started in the first place.
So you're not giving Mark a lot of literary credit, are you?
Well, I don't know. To me, it just made sense.
So wait a minute, Gretchen and Esther, you were teachers, right? Were you? were you English teachers?
No, I wasn't an English
No, we
teacher.
weren't. I wasn't an English teacher.
See, now,
No.
of course, English was one of my favorite subjects. And I would say, I think this was very deliberate by Mark, because he could have told the first part of the story, right?
Right.
And then he could have come right back and finished that story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he could have told this, if he wanted to connect them, he could have told the story of Herod's opinion. But the mere fact that he gets a story started, and before he finishes it, he sandwiches in between this story, I personally think that's very deliberate.
I think it's deliberate too. Like I said, to me, like it was deliberate that he did it. And to me, it's something that I do sometimes. So it makes sense to me. Because I can start a story in a minute and then jump off to another story and come back to
Right.
the end of that story.
Yeah, and obviously, yes, there's definitely those techniques of flashback and everything like that. But I think, to me, there's all kinds of ways Mark could have told these stories. And the mere fact that he chose to tell us about John the Baptist's death in the middle of a story of the first missionary journey of the apostles, to me, it's like a forewarning. It's a foreshadowing of, as Jesus is really starting to get himself together now, and he's really starting to get a ministry going. Always in the background, this threat to his life is lurking, because look at what happened to John the Baptist once he got himself up and running. It did not bode well for him. And of course, you're assuming most people who know the story know that Jesus is dead, so it's a I think a literary technique to remind us that there is danger in being a disciple and an apostle of Jesus. Because there's going to be powers that be who resist you, and you may just get caught up in their fights, and you get caught in the middle of it.
So, Father, does Mark implement this style or this technique anywhere else in his gospel?
Yeah, I'll have to look. I think he does it several times. So as I said, we already know that he did it with Jairus's daughter, right? Okay. You had Jairus's daughter, and then you had the woman with the hemorrhage. And like, again, and this is where some folks are uncomfortable. What I'll say is Mark knew those two stories. Whether those two stories actually happened in the chronology that Mark tells them, we don't know. We don't know. But clearly Mark brought, he made an association between those two stories. I don't think it was pure coincidence that the woman had a hemorrhage for 12 years and the girl was 12 years old. I think probably they were two separate stories that Mark knew about. And then he brought them together because of that. He saw a connection between them because of those 12 years. And then he decided to tell it that way. That's just my opinion. And as someone who likes to write, I see those things as deliberate. When I worked for the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, I would have to prepare my boss for press conferences, and I did a lot of news interviews myself. And one of the things you'll learn very quickly is that if they ask you a question and you say yes, but, and you give a qualification, right? You can be assured the press is going to cut out but, and they're just going to say yes, right? So what you learn to do is if you had to qualify a statement, you put the qualification in the middle of the sentence so that they couldn't edit it out. And that way you got your whole sentence in. And so when I see things, one thing inserted in another, I always think of that. That's a very deliberate move that he wants to connect these two stories. And so he tells them in the way that you kind of can't edit it out. You know,
Okay.
if you want to know what's going on with the 12 apostles, you have to sit through the story of Herod and the death of John the Baptist before you can figure out what happened to the 12 apostles.
Wouldn't you call that poetic license?
Well, it's the literary aspect of the storytelling.
Right, right. It doesn't necessarily have to be chronologically or anything, but he's taken license to fit these stories together that you have to read the whole thing in order to grasp what he's saying.
Right. And to me, it highlights that, there's no such thing as objective history. All history is biased according to the way we tell it. And so, when you look at the Gospels, they're not objective. They're being told by evangelists who they've got an agenda. And their agenda is that you believe in Jesus Christ as the Son of God. And so they're telling you these stories with a purpose. And that's why I believe they edit them and they order them. It's just not by accident that these stories are told the way they are. That's part of, maybe as someone who likes to write, that's another way of approaching the Bible is to look at how are these written? What is the author doing in the way he's writing the story? But anyway, so that brings us to the end of the apostles and Herod and John the Baptist. Enough for one day? Did I lose everybody?
No, that was awesome. That was wonderful.
No, we didn't.
Right.
We're still good.
So let's call that a day then, and we will pick up from here next week.
Okay.